Have any of you ever studied Romeo and Juliet in school in English class? You may recall that in Act 2, Scene 2, Juliet is expressing her frustration over the fact that she is a Capulet and the love of her life, Romeo, is a Montague. Two families that are viciously feuding with one another. And I want to read an excerpt of Romeo and Juliet. I'm sure you didn't think you were going to be getting Shakespeare today, but here we go. This is Juliet. O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, and I will no longer be a Capulet. And I'm just going to skip over. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part of belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? What's in a name, indeed? The opening of Ruth introduces not Ruth the Moabitess, but a family from the nation of Israel. Now this family, according to the book of Ruth, was from Bethlehem in Judah. In fact, many times in Scripture where Bethlehem is mentioned, a qualifier is also mentioned with it, as in here, Bethlehem in Judah. Or if you were to look at, say, Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, it would be Bethlehem in Judea. Or even if you read Micah 5, verse 2, it is Bethlehem Ephrathah. Note that in Ruth chapter 1, verse 2, this Israelite family is called what? They are referred to as Ephrathites. I mean, so many names. This all sounds just a little bit confusing, doesn't it? All of these different names. Is there more than one Bethlehem? Is it Judah or Judea or Ephrathah? And is it really important? Does it matter? Well, let's answer the first question first. Was there more than one Bethlehem? Well, actually, there were two. There were two Bethlehems within the nation of Israel. One was in the territory of Judah, hence Bethlehem in Judah, and that is the Bethlehem with which we are most familiar. And the other Bethlehem was actually in the territory of the tribe of Zebulun. And you can read Joshua 19, verse 15, if you want to take a look at that. Now, if you look on your map in your study guide on page 91, you will, and you look for Zebulun, its Bethlehem, it's not marked on the map, but its Bethlehem is in the northern and western part of the tribe of Zebulun. And if you're more familiar with the maps of the New Testament, then if you were to look at up in Galilee, where Jesus is from in Galilee, Bethlehem would actually be about 10 kilometers northwest of Nazareth, the place where Jesus grew up. Anyway, to differentiate between those two Bethlehems, the qualifier in Judah was added. As for the in Judea part of it, this was a rebranding of Judah sometime after the fall of Israel, when the Babylonians went in and destroyed the place around the 500s BC. Scripture only uses Judea in the New Testament, if you take note of that. Therefore, since no Old Testament scripture refers to Judah as Judea, it's likely that the name change came sometime after the end of the Babylonian exile, because Nehemiah and Ezra, those books and a couple others, they were written after the Babylonian exile, and it's still referred to as Judah and not Judea. So it's possible that even during the time of the Seleucids, if you remember back to our Bible study on Daniel and the history of that, during the time of the Seleucids, or even after Rome, the Roman Empire conquered that particular territory, did Judah become known as Judea. Okay, so we got that cleared up. What about the references to Ephrathah or Ephrathites? What's up with that? Well, frequently in the ancient Near East, a place was renamed once that territory had been conquered. So if a city was conquered, it was often renamed. but yet it was frequently still referred to by its old name. For example, when Jacob was fleeing from Esau, after stealing his birthright and all of that, he stops at a place for the night and sleeps. And he has this dream of a ladder going to heaven and angels ascending and descending on this ladder. And so Jacob believes that God dwells there. This is God's place of dwelling. And so he names the place Bethel, or Bethel, which means house of God. Now, often in Scripture, it is referred to as Bethel, but the original name of that place was called Luz, and you can read that in Genesis 28:19. Often in Scripture, as I said, that place is called Bethel, like if you were to read Joshua 8:9, when Joshua is setting up, getting ready to attack Ai, he's setting up this ambush between Ai and Bethel, and it's referred to as Bethel. However, when Jacob is speaking to his son Joseph, once they're in Egypt, and it was just before Jacob's death, so it would have been, this is in Genesis 48 verse 3, so shortly before his death, when Jacob is talking to Joseph about God's promise, he refers to the place as Luz, its original name, instead of Bethel. So, back to Ephrathah. Before the tribe of Judah took over that territory, the town of Bethlehem was called Ephrathah. That was its original name. You can read that in Genesis 35:19. So, one way to differentiate between the two Bethlehems was to say which territory that Bethlehem was, so Bethlehem in Judah, or to refer to the place by its original name, like in this case Ephrathah, or to refer to its citizens by its old name, so Ephrathites. So this is why. So that way everyone knew to which place people were referring when they said a name. Now to address Julia's question, what is in a name? And our question, is it really important? Well, names are tremendously important in the Scripture, as we just saw. But it's not just because we need to know from where a person is, like to understand the place or the name that people are called or where they're from, like Bethlehem and Judah. Biblical names carry significant meaning. There's a whole lot of symbolism behind the name, and this is not by accident. Think again about Jacob and his dream. Jacob names that place Bethel because he believed that God dwelled there. So he named it Beth, house, El of God. Okay? Jacob's name itself is even very significant. Jacob means supplanter. And Jacob was definitely a supplanter. If you recall, Jacob stole his older brother Esau's birthright, and then he stole his blessing. He effectively supplanted his brother's place. The older brother was to get the lion's share of things and basically sort of lead the clan, but Jacob undermines that, and he becomes the one who is to rule and all of that. So he was a devious, underhanded guy that did naughty things and supplanted his brother. However, Jacob's wrestling with God later on and winning, God renames Jacob Israel, which means wrestles triumphantly with God. And we read about that in Genesis 32, verse 28. Jacob, or should I say Israel, becomes a different man after that encounter with God, and God changes his name to reflect the change in the man. The names in the book of Ruth are very symbolic and they're very telling, so we need to be paying attention to them. So as you go through your study guide for this week, pay attention to the notes that talk about what the different names mean. Don't gloss over them. Consider them, consider what they mean, especially in terms of what's happening at that moment, or about what that person has done or is doing or is going to do, and any other situation, the names are significant. I also encourage you to think about what using such symbolic names says about God, who very purposely employs words with meaning all through, not just in the book of Ruth, but all throughout Scripture and even throughout history. God does not do anything by accident, and that includes the words that he uses. Even the very words that are in Scripture that a writer uses are significant. There's a reason why they choose those words. What is in a name? Oh, much, believe me. I hope you find that out this week. Happy studying!